So cool. Here you go. So the recording has officially started. So welcome everybody in this Scrum Caretaker meetup. I've started counting them. So it seems like this is the 17th one. So this is I've called it now SCM, Scrum Caretaker Meetup 17. So welcome very much. The topic is about extreme programming, and I want to share some stories, and I hope they will help you, which might be surprise, but you never know. So I've even made a preparation. So this is a PowerPoint that I've got for you guys. So it's Scrum Caretakers Meetup 17. And I want to emphasize in that sense, lots of things have happened in my life. I forget about the bad things, the unhappy, the whatever things. Let's ignore those things. But I like to remember the good things, and a lot of them sort of happened by accident, which is sort of good in a way. I'll talk more about the naivety that was involved in that in the next meetup. But I was in a fortunate position because long time ago when I started with Scrum or this Agile way of working, whatever you want to call it, my life of Scrum didn't start with Scrum. My life of Scrum started with extreme programming. And you don't want to know how many times I've looked back at that coincidence, almost like an accident, and remind myself of how fortunate that was. So let me share that. But first is this lady that wants to hold me back because last time, the previous Scrum Caretaker meetup, I shared what's changed in the updated version of my book. It's called Scrum, a Pocket Guide. And I've shared what changed in that. And let me tell that sort of stories first, if you're okay with that. And I felt like quickly visualizing things, just to show you a little bit of how I work. Because besides being a perfectionist and want to have complete control and being very almost like a command and control type of person that want to know what is happening and so on, I know I have to protect myself sometimes and let go of that. So what I do, let me start there. So I'm going to spotlight myself, not because I'm really important, but it makes it more easy to look at what I'm going to throw. Over time, over the years, I've grown into how to manage the courseware of the courses that I teach. So I teach professional Scrum classes as well as my own Scrum Pocket classes. And whenever I've got some a version of it, I don't do a lot of versioning. So I always have a sort of a baseline version. So this is a baseline version of a class, which is the official one, the one that it almost serves like a template. And that's the one I use for a specific class. So this is then a class. And by the end of that class, because there's always things that I change even during a class, and I've got new insights, and I remind myself I have to rephrase this and so on. And then I turn that latest version that I've taught back into a baseline version, and so on. So I never update just my templates. It's always by teaching and then turn that back into the baseline version. And I was recently updating my book, as you know. So this is how it looks like. The new edition. This is the fourth edition, and I was updating it, or was updating the Dutch translation. So, and this is the previous Dutch version. In Dutch, people that might speak Dutch might understand. It's called Scrum Wegwijzer. Um, and I was updating it. And then as I was updating that, I felt, oh my God, this idea of that back and forth really works if you sort of keep your mind or your brain to it. So what happened? So I created a Scrum Pocket Guide, version 1, and then 1.1, same version, but a different cover long time ago. And then I updated in 2016, 17, no, 19. And I didn't translate that version into Dutch. And then I created Scrum a Pocket Guide version 4 in English. And in a way, I overlooked the fact that I had translated version 3 into Dutch. This was the Dutch version the second edition of the Dutch version, which was based on the third version, and that third version turned into a fourth version. But the problem is, when I translated version 3 into my Dutch version 2, I did a lot of changes. I felt like, oh my God, yeah, this is fine. So it wasn't literally a translation of version 2 because I encountered new things and new insights, and I would say this differently right now, and so on. And then when I went from 3 to 4, I forgot what I added in version 2 of the Dutch version. So I was recently translating this into a Dutch version 3 by merging it with Dutch version 2. And then I encountered, oh my God, I have missed updates in my Dutch translation that are not in my English translation anymore. And another insight I got from doing that was, oh my God, there's a couple of changes that I really want to highlight with people that I forgot in the last session. So sorry for not being in the last session. If you were there, it's still new, but I wanna still focus on that first, if you're okay with that. So and what was that? Something that as I was translating it into from English into Dutch, something that I felt like, oh, I wanna throw this out. I also put it on LinkedIn. And it had to do with the chapter that is called Tactics for a Purpose. And within that chapter, I talk about sprint length. And I remember also in my English version, so now also in my Dutch version, I wanted to express my surprise, my amazement over what people do, what organizations do when they adopt and introduce Scrum. And I've literally put it like this. I said, I do wonder, and I think that is a mild expression because it drives me crazy, to be really honest. So it drives me crazy that leadership imposes the same sprint length on all teams within an organization. I do not get it at all. Why? Because Scrum is at the same time a closed thing, it's a clearly defined thing, but at the same time, it's also very open. In that sense, Scrum is literally a framework. It creates a frame of boundaries within which we can make a lot of decisions. And for me, sprint length is one of those decisions. I call them tactics or tactical decisions or tactical choices. So setting the sprint length, deciding over the sprint length is a tactical decision that is left open by Scrum, which is so powerful because it means you can tune, you can tweak your Scrum to your context. And context for me means the team, the people in the team, the technology that you're using, the product that you're building, the type of product that you're building, things within the organization, the consumers that you're working for, the market you're acting on, and so on. So I'm always baffled to find out in large organizations, but also in smaller organizations, that first of all, they all decide to go for a sprint length of 2 weeks. Nobody knows why, but oh, it must be 2 weeks. No, it's a common thing, but it's the only rule that Scrum has is 4 weeks. And then this industrial mode to introduce Scrum, where leadership, management, bosses, whatever, tell all teams within an organization, sometimes dozens of teams, that they all have to do 2 week sprints, plus, makes it even worse, that all their sprints have to start and end on the same day. I really don't get it. So I wanted to highlight it. So I added this to the version 4 of my Scrum Pocket Guide in English. It's now also in translate version than in the Dutch one because I don't get it. It's what I say. You can standardize on Scrum without industrializing it to death. That means you can standardize on Scrum. For me, means that within an organization, you can have all development being done on Scrum. It doesn't have to mean that every instance of Scrum has to look the same. That means standardizing on Scrum, they play by the same rules. Everybody knows what product ownership entangles. Everybody knows that there's a product backlog. Everybody knows what the accountabilities are. Everybody knows what it means to work in sprints, what the ID and the purpose of the events is within the sprint. But that doesn't mean that all those events and all those tactics have to look exactly the same for all teams. For the Dutch people, they might recognize this word. It's sort of difficult to exactly translate into English, but in Dutch they say that it's taking all teams through what they call a wasstraat, which is like sort of the drive-in washing thing where you get your car through. How's that even called in English? I don't know. Dennis, do you know your native English speaker?
Yeah, car wash.
A car wash. Oh my God, so simple. So it's like getting all your teams through the car wash, all the same way, the same route, the same practices, the same techniques, and so on, which is crazy. So that was a change in that Scrum Pocket Guide I wanted to highlight. Um, the- these types of convictions that I have don't make life easy for me. Um, in that sense, I was recently, I think shortly before the summer period in June, I did a management and sort of IT management session at a large organization in the Netherlands somewhere. It's a government organization. Had sort of the largest form of the executive team of the IT departments, worked with them for half a day. It was really great and so on. Really, yeah, full of enthusiasm. The IT managers were really, really happy. In the fall, they started with some form of what they still would call an agile transformation. They wanted to work with me, but they had already hired a transformation manager, an external coach or consultant for that, and said, "No, no problem. Please, was a lady, continue with that lady. I'm more than willing to work with her, and we'll see what happens." I was really convinced it's going to happen. And then in September, I had a call with her. I was connected with her on LinkedIn, but she had no idea who I was, which is good because it focuses on my lack of importance, which is good. But she also had no idea what I stand for, and we talked about things and some of these types of core beliefs that I have. And suddenly the assignment was sort of cancelled. It didn't happen. So and I'm very sure that I've got this sort of intuition that it was because of these things. Transformation manager wanted to have a control and that car wash types of approach and so on. And she was also talking about where to sort of picture my potential work for them. Was it then going to be a team coach or a management coach? And then the fact that I don't believe in coaching at the team level versus or separated from coaching at the management level. But I think that coaching should be about bringing those levels together, shorter to each other. Probably didn't help either. And another thing I wanted to highlight that was in that latest version also. In the previous version, I've talked about Daniel Pink. I'm just I'm being going to assume that most people know about Daniel Pink. Daniel Pink in 2011, I believe, in his book Drive, published the results of research on the motivation of people. Called it What Truly Motivates People. And there's a couple of misconceptions that wanna address, plus something that I've added in the meantime. So what Daniel Pink said is it's what's it seems a lot of people miss. Daniel Pink never said that money is not important. Daniel Pink said that money is important, but in knowledge work, our type of work, creative work, it's only important up to a certain point, up to a certain level. Now, people say, yeah, but Daniel Pink said money is not important. No, that's not what Daniel Pink said. It said it is important up to a point. And the funny thing is it's important up to the point where it's not important anymore. That it doesn't consume me, that it take all of your thinking and your thoughts when you can pay for your house, your money, feed your family, and those at least basic types of things that you're not worried about money and income. But on top of that, so money is important. It's sort of an extrinsic motivator. Also think about not just salary, money, but also bonuses, financial incentives, and so on. Up to beyond that point is what Daniel Pink said. Beyond that point, only in simple mechanical work will money be a offer more motivation. Now, in our types of work, it doesn't. In our types of work, Daniel Pink said it's about what he called autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Yeah, autonomy being, he called it self-directiveness, I believe, officially, being able to direct your own work, organize your own work. Mastery being able to be really good at it and being recognized for that and giving the time to achieve some level of mastery in whatever it is that you're doing and purpose, uh, feeling that you're contributing to something. So that is important. So those are then what Daniel Pink called intrinsic motivators. So in our work, beyond money, it's about intrinsic motivators. Now, there's another thing that a lot of people didn't get, and I want to focus on that. So when I worked with a Belgian colleague of mine, and we worked on, I worked with him on one of the essays that is in my book, 97 Things Every Scrum Practitioner Should Know. We had a talk about neuroscience, and he pointed me to something that is called SCARF or the SCARF model by David Rock, and something that I really liked. So I dove into that. I've been talking about this also in terms of engagement of people, commitment of people, humanizing the workplace, what I'm really keen on or really very important for me. And SCARF is an acronym. So every letter stands for something. It's talking about status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. So what makes people thrive as social creatures? Because in the end, that's what we are. In able to bond. To be able to bond with other people, the people around us. So that means for me, certainly a team and at large scale, maybe department organization, but it starts with a team. That means people need to have this sense of status, being recognized for being able to do something, for being good at something, for being important for some sort of reason. We all love certainty. We like certainty. We don't like uncertainty. So our brain, neuroscience, is full of these little anticipations on things that are going to happen. That's because we don't like that uncertainty. So we like to create little, almost micro predictions of the world around us to be able to anticipate them. Autonomy, we know that from Daniel Pink, relatedness, being able to relate to other people, and then fairness. And I remember from reading Daniel Pink's book that he said, yeah, but he talked about money and beyond that, autonomy, mastery, purpose. But in his book, he has also talked about those other aspects because status is what Daniel Pink, for me, translated into mastery. Maybe that's a step beyond just status. Sorry, relatedness is what he translated into purpose, and autonomy is already there. But in his book, Daniel Pink also stressed certainty and fairness. I'm going to assume that Daniel Pink was aware of these things, didn't make them explicit, and people only remember autonomy, mastery, and purpose. But don't forget, in both extrinsic as well as intrinsic motivators, certainty and fairness is also important. Fairness also means being treated properly. Also being paid properly compared to your colleagues, compared to what the market is offering, and so on. That's a way to get the matter of money off the table. So in the updated version of my book, I've also added a reference to a scarf on top of Daniel Pink. So you might want to look into that. You will find it, but I wanted to highlight that. Now this lady now in meantime is really impatient to get going about the real topic of today's session, which is um, extreme programming. And extreme program, let me share the story of my early years of Scrum Agile, meaning Scrum combined with extreme programming. So, and that started in 2003. So I've just got to share some bullets here, and I hope you don't mind me just telling the story of that. And I vividly remember, but you have to be careful with my memory because it might be as flawed as you can imagine, and that's sort of typical to human brains and human memory in it anyhow. But the way I remember getting started with this beautiful thing was, let me take you back to September 2003. I was at home. I had to recover from a small surgery, just an appendix surgery, so not a big thing, but you still have to stay at home for a week or two. So I had an appendix surgery. I was at home recovering, and I got a phone call from one of the owners of the consulting company that I was working for. And people from Belgium, certainly Guillaume, you know it's Kronos. So by then, the Kronos Group was owned by three people. Now you have to know that the Kronos Group, as a consulting organization, they're by that time certainly very big into technology consulting. And they've got this idea of really small groups. That means the Kronos Group as a whole was composed of all little groups. And whenever a group became too big, and that was sort of beyond 20 people, they would split it up. So the idea was to create a lot of little groups. Now, I got a call from one of the owners of the group, of the holding, let's say, and he shared a little concern that he had. There was one of those little groups within the holding had sold a project to a Belgian telecom company, which is called Telenet. Um, and what had they sold? It was the development of what we commonly called a core server platform, meaning core server. What was happening? Telenet, Belgium telecom company, back in 2003, had spent several years on studying, investigating, designing, blueprinting, whatever, a system for digital television. Now, I don't know if you remember, I guess most of you are old enough, but back in 2003, all television, certainly at a larger scale, was analog, so nothing digital. These days we've got set-top boxes, or we can record stuff, we can rewind stuff, we can look back stuff, we can look up the broadcasting schedule and pick whatever we want to see, go back into the past and so on. That did not exist by then. And Telnet in Belgium wanted to be the first big player to launch a platform commercially for digital television. They called it IDTV, Integrated Digital Television. And that one of that companies within the holding of Kronos had made an offer to Telnet to develop the core server, the core hub of that whole system. And Telnet had accepted that. That was probably the first surprise that the owners had. Oh my God, they have accepted our offer. Um, and then what was the problem in September 2003? The development should have had started like 3 months before that, but it didn't because, contracts and sign-offs and negotiations and last nitty-gritty discussions and so on. So development should have started 3 months before that, but didn't because we couldn't or they couldn't because of all types of negotiations and financial and legal stuff and so on. But as you know, certainly in those days, and I think the world hasn't changed much in that sense, the deadline didn't shift. So development hadn't started. It should have started 3 months before. It hadn't, but it was still intended to be complete 3 months after that. In December 2003, that system had to be delivered to Telenet. A bit of a problem. So owners of the company starting to worry. So they gave me a call. I was at home. I said, "Yeah, sorry, but I'm at home. Yeah, but please, can you at least come to the office and have a talk with some core people, and then please give us an advice on how we should proceed, Gunther." I said, okay, that's fine. I started working for that company in 2001, delivered some work in projects on with all non-agile things and so on, but that went okay at least, and that's why they called me up. So I went to the office and we went into a meeting room, and I was there with three other people. One of them was a lady, that doesn't matter. She had sold the system to Telenet. She was a sales lady, the lead of the sales team that had sold the system to Telenet. And next to her were two other people, two guys, two software architects. And not to go through that complete meeting, but in the end, it sort of boiled down to the following, that the sales lady said, Gunther, no problem, you can go back home, and we've got this under control. We've got this beautiful Gantt chart. I don't know if anybody still remembers what that was, a Gantt chart with all tasks worked out, detailed, and connected to each other with all those little bars connected and so on. A Gantt chart maintained with Microsoft Project in those days. So no problem, Gunther. You will see, we will add some people, we will change some things, we will look at critical paths and so on. We will reconnect things, we will create identity. it will work out. And I told her, you know what? I've been around for a while. I've got little formal education in project management and so on, and I'm just trying to do things hands-on. Um, I think that is going to look great on paper. You will have a beautiful Gantt chart that is certainly 3 months shorter and will still give us the illusion that it will work out because it will be an illusion. It will look great on paper. I don't think it will ever work out like that in reality. So we'll still get into a lot of trouble. Ah, no, don't really with. And then the two software architects said, Gunther, maybe we should do extreme programming. And I was like, okay, you're going to have to explain what extreme programming is about because I've only heard about it vaguely and not even in detail. So I'm not knowledgeable about extreme programming at all, honestly. So and that's sort of what they did in only 50 minutes. So they pulled up some sort of slide deck, put it on the beam in a meeting room. And in only 15 minutes, they took me through extreme programming, and I was completely enthusiastic, excited about it. Why? Because in extreme programming, there were a lot of things that were like what I would say built in or baked into the method. That means you couldn't escape it anymore, that I was trying to do anyhow. um, Iterative incremental way of working, regular feedback from customers, regular feedback from users, regularly showing what you've done. So in the time before that, done a project of that took about 8 or 9 months, and then every 1 or 2 months, irregularly, I checked in with the client anyhow. We showed what we did and so on. But something that I felt was even more important in extreme programming. And by then, it was sort of an epiphany almost. I felt like, oh yeah, but I've been missing out on this too much. Because in that long project, 8, 9 months, we had our own team room. And within the team room, we had different skills of people and so on. But it was almost like a collaboration that was too nice, or in that sense, too silent. We had a nice team room, and it was almost set up like a classroom, do you know, with desks in a row behind each other, everybody neatly working behind their computer. And then extreme programming looked at things differently. And I felt like, oh, cool, I want to do this because it feels like it's very me. It does things, but in a more structural, disciplined way that I have been doing, or at least have been trying to do. But it also adds stuff that I feel like, oh my God, yes, this is something I've been missing out on too much. So I felt like doing this. So went back to the owners of the company and said, yes, but I would love to be engaged in this. I would love to be involved, and I would love to use extreme programming for that. And without a 15 minutes explanation, probably the sense of crisis, the urgency, the fire, the idea of there's a fire that is going to burn us and wipe us off the planet, that feeling was so big that they gave me a go. Um, Sales lady was less happy, but it's what we did. September 2003, so I went back home, and then we started preparing for that. And the idea was to start development on the 1st of October with extreme programming. So what did we do? We threw away the Gantt chart, we threw away the project plan completely. There were people that had already been involved in making of the proposals and so on, so people know about functionality, features, and so on. And what did they do? So they went back to the request for proposal of Telnet, all the things that they wanted in, and they started creating user stories. Because in extreme programming, you have to express requirements as user stories. So a story from the perspective of types of users. In that case, it was a household member, for instance. Een household administrator were types of users that we had. We had internal people managing the system, administering the system, and so those were the types of users. So they created all the requirements, all the things that we needed to build, and they created them in user stories, a pile or a long list of them, because I started using Excel. Not really index cards, but more like Excel, not an official tool, but just Excel. And on the 1st of October, so in the meantime, also a team was assembled. So we had to look at all the skills we needed in the team, all the types of work that needed to happen. There was just one part of it that was really specific, meaning the database. We had to create a database, and we felt like we not going to have database work like all the time, and we need some really specialist DBAs being part of the team. So we decided to have a specialist DBA being part of the team like 1 or 2 days a week, so that he could come in and check in with everybody. What have we been doing? What has been happening in the meantime? So more like a coaching perspective. It was just extreme program. So we called it just iterations. We didn't call it sprints yet. The functional people that knew the system well, we called them proxy customers because in extreme programming, we talk about customer involvement. So we had proxy customers, so proxies for the customer in the team. They also did functional testing and so on. We had developers. It was a Java platform, by the way. So it's going to be it was the core system of that IDTV system. So, and we started working on it, and I had no knowledge about it. Just beside that 15 minutes presentation, one of those no, both of those software architects were also involved in the development. They acted as what I would like to call coding architects. So not people just acting as an architect, but they also participated in the actual development. And I saw them as a sort of almost like a sort of technical counterpart of our proxy customers. So the proxy customer, functional people knowing all about the functionality of the system and what it should turn into, we had a sort of technical counterpart for that. And I think that was part of even extreme programming. Extreme program didn't have the roles that we have in Scrum, so I was still just called project manager because that was still an accepted role in extreme programming. We really couldn't care less. So we started development on the 1st of October, and we planned to work in iterations of 3 weeks. That meant we had 3 iterations to be ready by December, when we started on the 1st of October. And during that first iteration, I wanted to invite the people of Telenet, our customer, and in that sense, external stakeholders, to we didn't call it a review because we didn't really do Scrum. We just called it an end of iteration types of thing, whatever. Um, so we invited them, and they were like, "Yeah, but why, Gunther? You know, we spent 3 to 4 years on making up the complete specifications of all the complete future IDTV system. We've given you the specifications for that first version, which was a pilot version, because it was supposed to go live for about 1,000 households, no more. It sort of, you could call it an MVP. An MVP for 1,000 households, you know what to build. We've got a contract, whatever, you know when to be ready. Why would we come over to, which was a travel of not too much, only 15 minutes, but still, why would we come over to your place and come have a look? Yeah, please come. You will see the system come alive, and you will give us feedback, and it will feel like more. We'll be developing the system in a way together and so on. And I only had to do that once. I never had to do that again with those people because they loved it. They indeed saw the system coming to life. They saw things happening. One thing that you need to know about the system, it was a complete, in that sense, a sort of backend system. It was a complete core system, but it had no GUIs. It had no graphical user interfaces. We didn't have to build screens or anything. And still, by the end of every iteration, we visualized it a little bit. In that sense, the team created very simple screens in which we could visualize, because it was a communication hub, the central server system that had to organize all communications, meaning from, by then it was called in Belgium set-top boxes, the things that would be installed in a household, at a family's place, and that would then connect via the public internet with our servers. Then we have to be able to connect to video servers, to other back office systems, billing systems, blacklists, subscription systems, video servers, lots of things. So, and in order to visualize what the system was doing. We had created very simple screens, no fancy stuff, no graphical stuff, whatever, in which we visualized the parameters that were part of the communication of the interactions between our system and all of the other systems. And it was more than enough for those people. They were happy to see it, but we didn't go into code, we didn't show technical stuff, so we merely visualized it. We also created functional testing scenarios throughout the sprint, and we used them at the end of sprint to go through functional testing scenarios as from the time that a household connects to the systems, looks up a movie, starts a movie, pauses a movie, all those types of things. We created that into, and in every step, we visualized the communication that was happening in the back. Worked out really fine. We had also worked with a lot of stubs and simulators of real systems that we had to connect to. So we had either we had clear interface descriptions or we created them ourselves and then handed them to the external parties if they weren't able to provide them. So that by the end of every iteration, we could show a system that worked against at least the official description of the interfaces, knowing that if we would have to go live and connect to the real systems, that we can assure Telnet that our system is working according to the agreed interfaces and the specifications. So, and we did that for 3 iterations, and we did completely extreme programming. That means we did everything. We did test-driven development or test-first development. We did that in pairs. We did pair programming, everything. No doubts, no discussions. This is not complex enough for pair programming. We did it all the way. And then we did our daily stand-up because we do extreme programming. I can still still call it a stand-up. We did our stand-up in the morning, as soon as everybody was in the office, because some people came sooner, some people came a little bit later. We did it as soon as everybody was in at the same time every day. Up to that point, the people weren't really in that sense working yet, still maybe checking mails, but also working at logs that had been produced by our systems. I'll come back on those things. And it worked really great. And I felt like I didn't have to do a lot of things. We had our user stories. User stories were pulled into the sprint. Um, they were not actively decomposed in a sprint backlog that consisted of tasks and so on. That meant our sprint backlog was just the selection of user stories for that sprint, or I should say iteration, because we didn't call it sprints yet. And all of the rest, the work that needed to be done for every user story was just designed by the team. It was not even put into a sprint backlog on a daily basis. We looked at it, so it went really smooth. We had the people owning the Kronos Group are not too great the funds of bureaucracy and administration. So they had given us the freedom to take a meeting room for us as a team. So we turned a meeting room into a team room because company doesn't care about meetings a lot anyhow. So we had this meeting room, and it was like a really dynamic, vibrant thing. And that's soon where I learned that, oh, this is what I had been missing in my previous work, that sort of continuous communication. People continuously talking to each other, pair programming in itself already, but also across the pairs. So we had created a meeting room. We had captured the meeting room, turned it into a team room with one big island of tables in the middle of the room, where around the table everyone was sitting, working as pairs, but everybody is sort of facing each other. So even facial expressions, funny things, people would sort of see that and then act on it. It was really brilliant. Now I'll come back on the actual specific practices that we used, but it's so great. And then the funny thing is, after 3 sprints, so by the end of November, early December, or 3 iterations of 3 weeks, we were done. We had built the complete system. So that Gantt chart of 6 months, I don't know what happened. We did it in less than 3 months, which was crazy. 3 iterations. I don't know how many man days it was, but we managed. And then the funny thing is, so the last iteration, the last of those three iterations, we were ready, and we were all guaranteed to work against the official systems and the interfaces and so on. So we asked talent to, okay, so when can we come and deploy at your premises? Because that still needed to happen. And then the problem was, oh, well, yeah, Gunther, sorry, maybe a bit of a problem because we don't have the systems and the servers and the infra isn't ready yet. Yeah, but we're ready. Yeah, but you know what? We never thought you were going to make it. It's like, hey, but we had a contract. You held us to the contract. You said there was a deadline. We needed to respect it. We did sort of, I shouldn't use that expression. We did the same amount of work in half the time, sort of. And now, but that's I prefer as developers or development teams, I do prefer to be in that situation and not the other way around. Imagine that talent would have been ready and we wouldn't have been. That wouldn't have been funny. So that showed me a lot of wow, this is so powerful. And I really couldn't really by that time really couldn't really get specific my hands on it. Why is this happening? Wrap my head around it. It was just happening. It was brilliant. I loved it. I enjoyed it so much. And in December, so that same year, that same month that we had to officially be ready, and we were, or be done. There was also an event happening in Belgium. By then, it was called Java Polis. I think in the meantime, I think it's renamed to BJUG also. In the years after, by then it was called Java Polis, a big thing in a cinema complex, a theater complex in Antwerp. It's called Kinepolis. Uh, Big rooms, cinema rooms, and so on. And as usual, our consulting company, very big and known in technology, was going to be there and was given a big slot to do a big presentation and so on. And our management felt like, let's bring a different story. Let's not focus on technology, but they asked me, Gunther, can you go to that event with all like crazy expert, deep specialist technologists and talk about what we've done here with Telenet. And I felt like, okay, cool, but I want to be prepared for that. Up to that point, I hadn't read anything or so. So I read a book about extreme programming. And I don't know if anybody ever seen this book. That's how it's called. It's called Extreme Programming Explained by Ken Beck. He's one of the sort of the big leader of things. And I don't know if you've seen the book. This is the original one. This is version one. I'll come back on that. The next version had sort of a green frame around it. So this is the original one. So I felt like, oh, if I'm going to have to do a presentation, I have to go in prepared and use official things and so on, and do it like that. I did a test session for the team, in which the team kindly, at least Java polls, a Java system, kindly told me gently, or really nice people, don't make any jokes about coffee, Gunther. That is so Java, coffee, Java, beans, so old school. So I would get rid of the jokes about coffee, Gunther, which it's what I did. I'm forever grateful to them that they asked me to do that. So we went there. We did that talk, but what I've learned from reading the book, so I read the book after we've done it, that, oh my God, we've done this really properly. We've done this really cool, according to all the principles, all the ideas. So big thanks to those two software architects that got me into that world, and I loved it. And then it was the year after that we had to start with a big commercial release, the same platform, that telecom company. So that pilot version, 1,000 households, was extremely successful. So they wanted to go commercial over the whole territory of Belgium, or mostly Flanders by then, telling that. I don't know, several hundred thousand or households or so. And we were going to do it with the same team, the same practices. And then those one of those software architects again told me, let's use Scrum, Gunther, for this. I said, okay, Scrum, I'm going to have to look into that. It's what I did. So we renamed our proxy customer called her, or several couple of people, actually product owner. I started calling myself a Scrum Master, at least internally, because it was 2004, still, certainly in Belgium, nobody knew what that was. Scrum, Agile, extreme programming sounded extreme. People don't like extreme things, certainly not in the business context. So we didn't use those terms. But still, I was acting as a Scrum Master, sometimes probably even as a product owner. So we wrapped, like I said, we wrapped our extreme programming practices in a frame of Scrum, which was helpful for reasons of clarity, a little bit more structure, a tiny little bit more structure. In a way, it felt helpful. Although, honestly, also looking back, in a way, in some sense, extreme programming in itself was almost like enough. But still, we wrapped it in Scrum, called our iterations now sprints. We also went for sprints of 4 weeks. So we had done iterations of 3 weeks, and we decided to go for sprints for 4 weeks, um, to make it a little bit more relaxed and get more, potentially even more work done and so on. And we still had the time. And you know what? In 2004, coming from software development projects where work was organized in phases of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and more months, then people didn't even believe that you would be able to get something of high quality really done, releasable in a month's time. So a month was more than enough. And what I also liked about the team, so they just threw away all the work we had done for the pilot version. I was like, oh, why are you doing that? Yeah, because you know what? Different situation, different performance, different architectural needs, and so on. They just threw away. We've built up a lot of expertise, a lot of knowledge, but we're going to build a system from scratch again, which was really, really important because that reminded me by then, oh yeah, I've been in this situation a couple of times too often, that you know what, you build a proof of concept, you build a POC, you build a small system, a sort of demo type of system, and then management, whatever leadership likes it, and then they want you to put that live. And then you have to go into strange discussions. No, it's not designed for that. It's not. It doesn't have the dimensions. Whatever. It's not suited to do that. Yeah, but it's. I see it working. Put it live anyhow. So that's something we didn't do. We went for a full rethinking and redesigning of the system. And as we had been doing that by the beginning of 2004, then somebody pointed me out, say, "Hey, Gunther, you know what? One of those software architects again. You know, there's a Scrum class happening in Belgium, in Brussels by then. That was in May 2004. That was a CSM class, a certified Scrum Master class. It was by Ken Schwaber. I had no idea, but look, afterwards I've learned that this was the first CSM class in the wider region, at least in the Benelux. Um, I think there were about 25, 26 people. We went there with 5 people from our team, I believe, 4 or 5 people. Um, and I was really, a really great student. Let me quickly get a book for you guys, quickly. I'll be back. See, bad preparation. Yes. And I was like the student I wanted to go into the class prepared. So in the advice of attending the class, there was the advice to read the books that Ken had written. And this was the first book. I don't know if anybody remembers this, Agile Software Development with Scrum. This is the original one. And there was also a second book by then, Agile Project Management with Scrum. Yeah. So I went to the class, I read those 2 books. We had been actually doing it. So I had this very strange experience in my CSM class, May 2004, that I didn't really learn something. But still, it was a fascinating class. So probably I've learned more than I realized, but not technically about Scrum because we've been working in sprints, we've been doing stuff and so on. That's some. I did have some fascinating disagreements with Ken. But then later on, I realized, oh my God, he's right and I'm not. But I was stubborn. I didn't want to give in to that. But was so great. In my mind, it was also a 3 days class. Although everybody says that no, it's always been 2 days classes. You see how flawed my memory can actually be. So and that was. Um, an incredible start, sort of half a year of starting with these things. That was really helpful in other work that I did with largely the same team. So a next step in 2005, 2006 was to evolve the system even more. So we didn't have to recreate it from scratch. It was just evolutions. But there was one important thing that happened. It was by the end of 2005. So by the end of 2005, the new system, the updated, upgraded system, was sort of big bang types of releases overall from for the full IDTV system. It needed to go live by the end of December 2005. And I remember having a meeting. So we regularly had weekly meetings at Telenet, or sometimes in a really big fancy place outside of Telenet in the city of Mechelen in Belgium. Um, that they then hired for really important meetings. And there we were, as small Belgian people with a lot of international players around the table. Because in Belgium, nobody knew video service and so on. They all had to get organizations or companies from outside of Belgium to do that. And there we were, small Belgian company with all those big shots around the table. And I remember vividly by the end of November 2005 that in a big meeting with all those beautiful people with real project plans and with real progress and so on mentioned on their project plans and reporting out to talent. It was a program manager, an international program, Swiss guy, Alexander Salcedot, appointed in the meantime by talent to make sure that it all worked out fine. And so everybody reporting out to that big shot program manager, yeah, fine, we're on track, no problem. And by the end of November 2005, I remember in that meeting, me scared as hell, red, nervous, I don't know, but I said, I'm sorry, Alexander, but we will not be ready by the end of December. Guy turning red, angry. Why not? Yeah, but you know what? We've been asking for testing and testing environment from talent for the past 2 months. It's still not ready. So I can no longer assure you that by the end of the year, by the end of December, it will all work out as we think it should work out because we don't have your testing environments. Oh, what do you mean? That can it be? Whatever, angry and shouting or whatever. Yeah, sorry, Alexander, I'm not going to give the guarantee because I've been asking for this on a weekly basis. It's still not there. I'm sorry, it's too late now. We will not be ready. And it was anger and whatever. And it's crazy. There I was probably all those other project managers of those big companies grinning and whatever. And then the funny thing that happened was the following. So then he asked me, when can you will be ready? Right, as things started cooling down after a while. Well, I think if you can make available that testing environment for us as quickly, we're now in November, somewhere beginning of December, we're working what we call sprints of 4 weeks. It will be the end of January. Oh, the end of January, that's a month more and so on. Can't you make that half of January? No, no, sorry, we don't do half sprints. We don't, we only do full sprints. No, it's going to be the end of January. And reluctantly, they gave into it because I wasn't giving in. I felt so bad. And the crazy thing was that by the end of January, we were ready to install. We were truly ready. We were done. All was functioning. And none of those other suppliers was. Not a single other supplier around the table was ready. So I was looking back by then, I felt like I'm so happy that I said no, but I wonder what went through the heads of those other people around the table. They were probably extremely happy that I was taking all the shit, that I was getting the storm over me because they knew they weren't ready either, but nobody wanted to admit it. But imagine, think of several months after the end of January, um, who got a recommendation and so on from that same customer, from that same program manager, only we got. So in the end, sometimes you have to say no, no, we cannot deliver. And none of those suppliers were ready. So in the end, Telenet had to postpone things far beyond several months beyond the end of January. And it was not because of us. And the great thing about the way that we had been working is that we had to give support to Telnet after the delivery, after the deployment on their premises and their infrastructure. And I remember feeling bad for the team because they had to be, we kept them available at some point in time, even at Telnet's premises, and they had literally nothing to do because we had created such high quality that our systems were just working, they were performing, and so on. It was crazy. But the funny thing is that to sort of keep themselves busy at some times, they started doing work for other parties and other departments within Telnet. I remember the back office of Telnet, so the complete billing, subscription, whatever types of things, and the administration for that was maintained by a large Indian company, and they were often struggling with interfaces and as you call web types of things and so on. And our team, just to keep themselves busy as support for that, started fixing their problems for them, which was so funny. Another thing is they started closing the door of the team room more and more. It was in a sort of container setup because there were construction works happening at Telnet. They started closing the doors because they started playing games. But you can't hide those things. You can close the door, but people will find out. And I remember vividly there were times where like program manager, the project manager, the whatever, the engineers of Telenet, when they felt like, oh, we need an hour of time for themselves to relax, they went over to our team because they knew there we can sit, relax, and play a little game with them. So it was so great. But the power of working in this way was so enormous. So we've applied it in a couple of more systems around 2006. The only thing I want to mention about that in those things, so WWAOW stands for Worldwide Association of Writers. It's not called like that anymore. But in 2006, there was a local Belgian company that was big in wood. So they treated wood planks and all types of things, but sort of wholesale level. So they didn't, so they distributed to carpenters and companies that turned them into furniture and so on. So the wholesale of wood. But the owner of that company, the CEO of that company, he wanted to be like known as a big sort of captain of business in Belgium. So he wanted to be open for innovation also. He went out to talk about innovation. And it was crazy because at some point of time within his own company, there was a product manager in their business, wood, wholesale wood and so on. He had a past in the world of publishing companies. And he knew from his past working for a publishing company that there's a massive amount of manuscripts that people send to publishers that are not getting published because publishers have to make choices and they only publish like only a few percent of all the manuscripts that they receive. People that think I've written the new thriller, I've written a great novel, a great book, or whatever. So it was all about literature, poetry, and so on. So, and he had this idea, what if we would offer those people that get rejected by official publishers, what if we would build a platform for them to self-publish their own book? And that owner of that wholesale wood company was open to do that. And he was willing to invest in that. So he created almost like not yet a spin-off, but something within his own company and paying for that. And then because I have a past in the world of books, I had a bookshop before I entered that company called Kronos. Um, I'm a big fan of reading and so on. I've got my background in IT and so on, so we were approached for that. So we built that system for them without anything more than just this idea, the idea of building a platform where would-be writers could upload their manuscript, format it, design it, create a cover for it, and so on, and then make it available via an e-com web shop. And if people would then order it, it would be published on demand. So there would be no stock, no inventory of pre-printed books. No, it would be printed on demand. So just by that idea, and I remember I've talked about user stories already. Obviously, we had to think about. how much is this going to cost? How long do we think this is going to take? I had an established team, so I was able to work with the same team. And the requirements were so big that sort of sometimes I hope I can be a little bit creative. It's never happening, but still. So we created a backlog of something that we called um, cosmic stories. Because user stories, epic stories, bigger ones, and I felt like, yeah, but sort of decomposing their demands into something story-like. It's not epic stories are not even big enough. So I've called them cosmic stories. So we estimated cosmic stories and so on, and then started decomposing them as we started working with that. With no more than that, in about 6 months' time, we just collaboratively with that customer built that system for them. And what was new for me was this was obviously a web platform. So it had to be it was full of GUIs and graphical design, user experience, and so on. And sort of like we started just with extreme programming a few years before that, just without too much prior knowledge, without being biased too much. We just did it. That meant we expanded the team with one or two graphical designers, user interface designers, user experience experts, and we just pulled them into the team. And all the work that they did within the team on graphics and user experience, they just did as part of the team. So they didn't build wireframes, whatever, upfront or the sprint before. No, they just did it in the sprint that we needed to build screens. It was the designers and the developers and functional testers and so on, all working together in a sprint. So no upfront, whatever things. So and it turned out fine. It was a beautifully designed system. At some point, one funny event that happened. I know that the owner of that company is called Peleman, by the way, Peleman Industries. Mr. Peleman himself, he at some point of time he said, "You know what? I want that WOW website, a Worldwide Association of Writers. I want that to be. I want the dominant colors to be Jaguar green." Jaguar green. And that's because he drove a Jaguar, a car. And we looked that up, Jaguar green, and it was way too hard. It was harsh on the screen. So at some point of time, we invited them. We had, because we had great graphical people and with skills, they worked with skins and whatever they had. I don't know the right terminology. So we had prepared a website platform in with Jaguar Green, but knowing that this is going to be too harsh and they will realize it, we had prepared two different versions of green too. So we invited them, big TV screen, showed them the Jaguar green, and I remember the daughter of the CEO saying, "Oh my God, Dad, no, 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 it's not good. Yeah, it's Jaguar green, but you know what?" And then we said, "Yeah, you know what? We've got some possible alternatives." And in the end, they went for a lot smoother green and so on. And I like that sort of collaboration, interaction, and so on, but also showing it on a TV screen really made a difference. We would never achieve that with paperwork also. So it's really, really important. I've called it my formative years. And what, in the end, looking back later on, I had to think back, why am I still thinking back as those early years as really joyful and engagement and almost happy years? And one of the things that certainly played a big role was intrinsic motivation, or in Scrum terms, commitment or engagement, dedication. I didn't have to tell the team what to do. I didn't have to tell them to build excellence. I didn't have to tell them to build quality. I didn't have to tell them to collaborate, to communicate, to cooperate with each other, to check with the customer regularly. They were just eager to do that. They were like really, for me, professionals. They were just eager to do these types of work, which was really, really helpful. I started finding out that after my formative years, as from 2007, working with other teams in other organizations and for other organizations and working with other people, that intrinsic motivation wasn't there. The motivation to do this, to be agile, to do extreme programming, to do test-driven development, to work in sprints, to get work done by the end of every sprint, that intrinsic motivation wasn't there. And then you have to try to motivate people to do that. And that is really, really difficult. one of the hardest periods in my life, 2007, 2008, having to put words, give words to things that up to that point we had been doing almost implicitly. And suddenly you have to make that explicit and explicit why that works. If you have to do that, you already lose a lot of important information. Using extreme programming as those development standards, extremely important. I'll come back on that because it created additional feedback loops within the sprint, not on top of sprints, but within the sprint, even at a frequency higher than the daily scrum. It created feedback loops, and I'll share them in detail. And one of the things that happened over time that XP started fading. Scrum became really big. And that's a bit of a problem because a lot of people seem to think that, yeah, but if we now organize things with Scrum in sprints and we've got all those meetings or events, whatever you want to call them, in place, then suddenly everything will magically work out. It doesn't. Within Scrum, you need to have clearly defined, agreed standards, practices that everybody knows and adheres to. Otherwise, you can't properly do Scrum. And that's not in the least because you create additional feedback loops. And even in my Scrum classes, I want to be really honest, in those early years, we couldn't care less about the roles. We couldn't care about functions within the team. Everybody participated. People were not locked into, yeah, but you're a Java developer, you're a tester, you're a functional tester, whatever. We couldn't care less up even up to the level of myself, I would say. I probably, towards the external world, they looked at me probably as a project manager. And towards them, I probably often operated as a product owner. But within the team and towards the team, I definitely operated as a scrum master. Uh, Provoking people, irritating people, probably sometimes asking questions around, never telling people what to do, never intervening, participating in the daily stand-up, but also always from a peer perspective. We did the three questions by then in our stand-ups, so I'll share with the people what have I done since the previous stand-up, what I'm planning to do now, and what is bothering me, what am I running into, what is hindering me, and everybody did that. So in a sense, we really have worked as a whole team together, which is in the end the practice that was added to extreme programming later on, by the way. So we couldn't care about functions, but we didn't even really mind the official accountabilities of Scrum even. So sometimes I was Scrum Master, sometimes I did product owner work. At some point of time, working with a government organization, do this in 2006 also, I had to go to meetings. And in the beginning, I took along my coding architect, who was a different person, but in the meantime, I tried to take on the person, the lady that was officially the product owner. But you know what? Those meetings were so boring that I felt like, you know what? You just stay at home. I'll do the boring stuff for you guys. And then in a way, I acted as a product owner. So that was really, really powerful. In that sense, I've translated that into please, please, please see that separation of accountabilities in Scrum. See that as an invitation to collaborate all the time. Don't lock yourself into those things. And by those things that we call development standards, um, clear development standards, really useful. That is why I am most grateful that my life of Scrum started with extreme programming. Because as from day one, in my experience with Scrum, it made very clear, apparent, you need clear development practices. Otherwise, you cannot effectively apply Scrum. Scrum just doesn't tell you what those practices, what those standards should be. But understanding Scrum properly means that you know, okay, Scrum tells us that we need development standards in place. Just Scrum doesn't tell them what they should be. So, and that's why I added in my latest update of my pocket guide, I've added this thing that I call the Scrum Vitals, the vital elements, the vital parts of Scrum. I don't know. It was edited by a native English speaking editor, so he let it pass. So I'm going to assume that it was okay. Call it the Scrum Vitals. And in those Scrum Vitals, at the heart of it, you will see the values and what I call the main management principles underlying Scrum, meaning the Scrum values, and then self-organization and empiricism. That is for me. those are the underlying things in Scrum. And then in Scrum, you've got the rules of Scrum, the mandatory rules of Scrum, the events that you have to organize, the accountabilities that you have to address, and the artifacts that you have to manage. Sort of what the Scrum Guide, in a way, largely describes the rules of the game. And then the purpose of the game is to deliver value. Yeah. And then what is important about those development standards is it's one of the tactics you apply to play the game. It's a mandatory tactic, except we don't say what it should hold. Yeah? But development standards is one of the tactical choices you make to play the game, and you need to do that. Now there are more things for that. So that is for me Scrum. It's just sometimes wording bothers me a little bit. This is for me Scrum. Tactics, rules, purpose. This is the essence of Scrum. Anything that comes on top of that, that is something that I would call complementary practices. That's why earlier on I said we wrapped RXP in Scrum. So the system as a whole was just Scrum. And you apply practices and tactics and you make tactical choices and strategic choices within Scrum, but it doesn't change Scrum. You don't add them onto Scrum. So that is something that bothers me sometimes with the term of complementary practices. And this is a little quote from my book. So in my book, I've added a new chapter in edition 4 of my book. It's called Extreme Development, um, building on the idea of extreme programming, but extending it to not just programming, but to all the work that the Scrum team does, meaning development. So the rules of Scrum don't include specific development practices, but you have to define them anyhow. Otherwise, you can't really use Scrum effectively. So my plan was to read that, but I'm not looking at the time, not going to do that. So this is the same quote, and I've added a little quote from my book saying, although the practices from extreme programming are good, but non-mandatory practices from a Scrum perspective, I believe that if you apply Scrum in a software development context, you should really consider adopting them and what I call turning them into a daily habit. Because Scrum and extreme programming were built for each other. I remember in my CSM class, May 2004, and Ken Schwaber, never met him before. They just realized that we've been doing extreme programming. So he came to me, just opened. So Gunther, how does that work? Extreme programming with Scrum, is that useful? How does that work? How does that feel? As if he didn't know. But by then I thought, oh, he doesn't know. So I told him, yes, they were born for each other. I believe they are born for each other. They were made for each other. So, and in the meantime, I've learned that the official story goes that Ken and Jeff did not add development practices to Scrum because there was something like extreme programming. They felt like we don't have to add that to Scrum because there is a great way of working in that regard. But unfortunately, XP started fading, and I'll come back on that. So, but to take you to extreme programming quickly, anyhow, based on that book, Extreme Programming Explained, wonderful book. So, XP has values. Like Scrum has values, XP has values too. 5 values: simplicity, communication, feedback, respect, and courage. Those are the values defined in extreme programming. And I like to translate simplicity into the simplest thing that might possibly work. That is something that has helped me so much, not just in work, but also in life. Huh? And the official way to say that is you want to maximize the value created for the investment made. That is simplicity. But I translate that into the simplest thing that might possibly work. Communication face to face on a daily basis. Feedback, at least by delivering working software early. You will recognize statements from the Agile Manifesto. So the book Extreme Programming Explained was published in 2000. So Extreme Programming came into the world via the 3Cs project. The C3 project, sorry, the Chrysler project in 1996. And Kent Beck wrote his first book in 2000. Ken Beck is also the person that motivated Ken Schwaber, to write a book about Scrum also. So the first book about Scrum was 2002, although Scrum is actually a year older than Extreme Programming, 1995. The first book about Scrum was later. And I know from my conversation with Ken, it was a lot to do with Ken Beck told him, Ken, you have to write a book about Scrum. So, but these were the values in that book, described in that book. There were loops described in that book, and this is probably a cleaner version of the handwritten or the hand draw picture I think Ken Beck had in his book. So this is the cleaner version of that. Ken Beck really hands-on, so really beautiful. I love it. But this is the thing. So shall I show it in the book anyhow? So let me show it how it's in the book. Let me this thing spotlight myself. So this is how it looks in the book, handwritten by Ken Beck. So I love it. But XP, it thrives on the idea of loops. You will recognize some ideas of the Agile Manifesto, sustainable pace, very important. You will recognize stories, the on-site customer. Officially, XP said they have an on-site customer, somebody from the customer working with you as a team that turned into a proxy customer later on. The workspace is there, the technical practices are there, test first, simple design, refactoring, and so on. The stand-up is there, small releases is there. Collective code ownership is something that I really loved, meaning the whole team owns the complete code base as a team. Nobody can say, stay away from that. That is mine. That is my code. Nobody can say that. It's collective code ownership. Acceptance test. On top, you will see planning game, velocity. I love this idea of a planning game. I've been in those early days, in the later phases of Work for Talent. I've been a couple of times to Telenet and played the planning game with them. So here's our backlog. All the use we kept working user stories. Here's our backlog. What you want us to do now? Is there something you wanted to do differently? What can we fix? And then led to like really interactive conversations of what is most important now, what can we do later, what might we be able to skip, and so on. So really, really a great way of working. This is, I think, by Ron Jeffries. He translated those loops into XP practices. You will all see a picture of the book that I like so much, Extreme Programming Explained, but you will see the same things coming up. It's sort of like in loops already. I'm quickly going to show a little picture, but I'm not going to elaborate on it. You see, it's messy, it's ugly. That's because I created it. But this was a translation of all those XP things in my time that I was working at Capgemini. And for your information, I left Capgemini in March 2013. So that this is a really old thing. But it's got all those things: incremental design, pair programming, refactoring, sustainable pace, energized work. And this is based a lot on the fact that um, I think in 2004, Ken Beck published a new version, updated version of his book, Extreme Program Explained. The same cover, white, but then with a green frame around it. And he suddenly expanded a lot of the practices from extreme programming. Up to that point, there were like 12 of them, I believe. And then he slowly created them into primary practices and added secondary practices to that, sort of created a lot of confusion. And this is, I think, an overview of all the things you see on the left-hand side. Whole team together was added in that version. Now, I like simplicity. And I like to see those development practices or standards as additional feedback loops of development. I've described this in 2020 in a paper that I wrote. It's what's called moving your Scrum downfield. And I called it more loops than meets the eye. And that is so important. One of my lessons of my early days, feedback loops within the sprint so that you can close work properly before the end of the sprint. So no open work by the end of the sprint. And this is my version, updated version, and then created by somebody with more drawing and graphical skills than I have and ever will have. Um, at the heart of our work, and I still stand by that, we did pair development, pair programming, pair development in a test first way, creating a test first and then creating code until that test succeeds. And pair development means Sometimes that is two programmers working together. Sometimes it's a programmer and a tester. Sometimes it's somebody with a functional perspective. Sometimes it's a business analyst with a programmer, whatever. But we did that all the time. And let me explain that pair programming for me, what made it so successful. Um, so in those early days, I was looking up papers also, sort of scientific, whatever, academic research on it. There wasn't a lot, but there were a couple of things in an literally academic setting, meaning universities, that had been comparing um, what I would call single programming versus pair programming. Same systems developed in a single programming way and pair programming way. They had discovered by then that pair programming was 10% more expensive, but quality was a lot higher. So I ignore the 10% more expensive. I deny that that is actually happening. I've never estimated something taking into account, oh yeah, but we're going to have to do this with pair programming, so we need more money, more funding, more time. I never did that. And one of the reasons is because the quality you produce as a pair is so much higher that you get more simple systems, more clean systems that need less maintenance, but most of all, you get less rework afterwards. You've got less problems that need to be fixed afterwards, after it's in production. And that's one of the things. But what we did our stand-up in the morning, and in the morning we formed the pairs. That meant people were looking at the user stories, and we did something additional, by the way, within the team. Um, People took what we call the lead in a user story. So somebody said, oh, this is a great user story. I'm going to take care of this user story. I'm going to make sure that this story gets finished start to end. And that meant every half day, because we switched pairs after lunch, every half day, the lead could look for the right partner to work with the next half day. So that was one of the secrets of the success of pair programming. The other thing was another sort of rotation of roles was in the half day that a pair worked together, they had the roles of what we call driver and navigator. The driver is a person behind the steering wheel, driving the car, minding the road directly, making sure that he didn't get off the road and that he brakes and whatever, minding the road. Now we've got the navigator next to him or her, minding the overall system, minding the map. Are we driving in the right direction? Is this the design that is needed? Is this according to the naming conventions? Is this according to our architectural standards and so on? And that separation of driver and navigator is important because it's not two people doing the same work. No, they are live, real time doing different types of work. And those types of work are work that a single programmer has to do too. Because a single programmer would regularly switch from acting as a driver, stopping as a driver, acting as a navigator. So you just make that two types of work happening concurrently. And that's why for me, pair programming is not more expensive. And switching driver and navigator happened dynamically, flexibly within that half day of working together. And at some point of time, we had to incorporate new people into the team. And pair programming allowed us to just do that without any problem. In that sense, we didn't give people a lot of introduction into this is the system, this is the code, read this and so. No, we just invited them to be part of the team and become part of the pairs and just dive into it. And we even had a rule that after a few days of being part of the team, as a newbie, you had to take the lead in a user story. That sounded scary to them, but it was a really useful thing because it meant that they could work out a user story with all of its aspects. And thanks to pair programming, every half day they could pull something in, ask somebody to be part of it, and then help them out with that specific part of the work. That was the best way to ramp up and speed up as quickly as possible. By the way, we did the same with applicants. People, sometimes we had to hire new people. And before hire them, we didn't go through boring application talks and whatever. We just asked them to free up half a day or a day of their time and be part of the team. And then the team decided primarily are we going to hire that person or not? So really, really powerful options that come from pair programming. Yeah. So at the heart, pair programming and test first development, we had also continuous integration, and refactoring was just a regular development practice. People didn't have to justify, they didn't have to explain. It was just part of the work. If people run into code that they felt it's working fine, but I think we can improve it, they were allowed to do that from the idea of collective code ownership. No justification. It wasn't part of sprint backlogs. It was just part of creating, delivering high quality. And we had continuous integration, so we had a CI system running 2 to 3 times a day. In those days already, 2003, 2004, reading out all the code that was checked in by a pair, reading it out, doing all of the testing, automated deployment testing, build test, regression testing, integration types of things, reusing those test first tests and so on. And we did that multiple times a day. So multiple times a day, we had feedback within the feedback loop of the daily Scrum that things were working at the individual level or the level of the pair and at the system level. And if there was a CI version that we felt, oh, this is functioning properly, no problems, no errors, no logs, whatever, then people would have a look at it from a functional perspective. Those functional testers within the team creating functional test scenarios and then running those test scenarios on the CI system. And on top of that, because in the beginning, 1,000 households, after that, I think a few 100,000 households, I forgot, we run our own performance testing. The same team, the same team built and maintained all those tests, including the performance test. That meant we had a separate system in place and a CI system that the functional people said this is fine. That was deployed on the performance system, and then a load was generated and simulated with tools. There were testing scenarios created with think times and ramp up times based upon those functional testing scenarios. So every 24 hours, we knew what was working or what was not working. And if something was not working, that was fixed first by somebody. And we knew who had the leading user stories, we could send that back. And the only team rule that we had in those days was no finger pointing. If anything goes wrong, fine, no finger pointing. It's not about blaming people. We'll figure it out. We'll fix it together. No finger pointing. But these development loops, I also call them quality loops. This is how you build in quality in Scrum in a sprint, so that by the end of sprint you are assured of high quality. And this also helps turning a sprint not into a mini waterfall, where you do some testing, integration testing by the end of sprint. We did it literally on a daily basis. And that is so important. So do this within your sprints. And this is why I say you've got feedback loops within the daily Scrum. You know, Scrum, 2 feedback loops, Sprint is a feedback loop, daily Scrum is a little feedback loop to manage that. In a way, for me, virtually on top of your daily Scrum, you've got those feedback loops coming from your development practices. And even in our environment, Java, you could do this literally. You had the tools, we had systems that did automatic testing, checking of naming conventions and so on. We lived by the principle of self-explanatory code. So our systems were not overloaded with comments because our, I don't know how it's called, parameters, functions, whatever procedures were all self-explanatory. No abbreviations, no crazy things, just long things that explained what we did. And that's how we build quality. On top of that, so these are the loops that we talked about in seeing Scrum for more like business opportunities and certainly against the idea of evidence-based management. You've got loops on top of that, closing the feedback loop with your customers. This can be done within a sprint because even within a sprint you can release. You can also do this after sprint. You can do this every couple of sprints. I don't care. But even then, you need to keep closing feedback loops with your customers by releasing and then capturing their feedback by measuring the impact that you have. You can do that in Yeah, fixed. Now, why has XP faded? Because, like I said, um, around 2000 and around the time of the Agile Manifesto 2001, extreme programming was a lot more important and more known than Scrum was. A lot more. And certainly in Europe, there was a lot of extreme programming happening in Europe. Maybe smaller scale, whatever. I believe certainly in Belgium in December 2003, we were like the first big system, I think, built for commercial purposes on extreme programming. And yet it has faded. So as Scrum became bigger, it seems XP faded. And that was XP didn't fade because Scrum became bigger. It was unfortunate. And one of the reasons I've been talking about this with several people, including with Ken Schwaber a lot when I worked at Scrum the Talk. One of the reasons was in those early days, so the Agile Manifesto became a success. Totally unanticipated, unexpected success. People started signing the Agile Manifesto. I also did in 2003, and it became a success. And certainly somebody like Ken started traveling the world to promote Scrum and to help people like understand Scrum and so on. But at the same time, the big sort of, let's say, leader of the XP movement was Ken Beck. He had to stop traveling, as far as I know, for medical reasons, whatever, but he had to stop traveling. So the leadership, the big promoter of XP, unfortunately sort of disappeared. He went off the radar. That was certainly a big problem. Because at the same time, Ken Schwaber started traveling the world. Um, the definition of XP changed. I felt that as I really felt it as almost painful. I've read the first book, the 2000 book, the first version of extreme programming, and it was extreme in a very positive way. It was clear, it was concise, it was direct, it was straightforward. And then suddenly, Ken Beck published an updated version of his book, and he sort of rewrote almost completely the book. And I think it baffled, it confused a lot of practitioners of XP. What is happening now? What we've been calling XP, so suddenly we've got primary practices, secondary practices. So I think that undermined also the motivation and the belief of people in it. And one of the reasons why Ken was so successful together with other people to get Scrum onto the world is that class, the class that I went to in 2004, the CSM class, Certified Scrum Master class. We all know that in that time you could just attend the class 2 days. I believe 3 days, but it was 2 days actually, probably. Just attend and you could call yourself certified. We all know that isn't the way to go, but it has a good side too, because by doing that, Ken was able to attract a lot of people to his classes. And then those people didn't came to become a Scrum Master. Ken also didn't have the ambition to turn them into Scrum Masters. Ken just used the hunger, the desire for certifications as a way to attract people to classes and then explain Scrum to them. And not just the Scrum Master part. We all know the downside of it. It was with credibility, something that Ken tried to fix when he started Scrum the Talk. But that type of approach, which by that time the Scrum Alliance promoting Scrum, it did not exist for XP at all. So Ken Beck didn't want to do things like that. He didn't want to build classes. He didn't want to build certifications around it. He dropped anyhow because of health reasons. So, and that for me explains why XP faded, which is pretty unfortunate. So, in the next meetup, which is happening next week on Friday, I will tell more stories. And I made naivety the central theme of next week's thing. Although in my early years with extreme programming, I think naivety was important. We just did it. We weren't biased. We didn't even read the books first. We just applied it. We probably checked. We had some people with experience, and then afterwards checking the books and going to a class really helped. So think about that. I hope you will join next week. Um, This is it for today. Don't forget, I will share a PDF of this version too, that you've got a potential Scrum caretaker discount on all of my planned professional Scrum classes. But it's enough of promotion. So I want to thank you very much. Oh, I still had that spotlight on. Thank you very much for being here. I have